Ready? Okay, can we get started, please? I want to do a couple of things tonight, but first we'll carry on where we left off before. On page 132, if you open your books to that, please.
Open your books.
The notebooks, yeah. I've laid out for you the different positions of various philosophers with respect to the principal problem of all philosophy, namely the universal. Do you remember I said there are philosophy's principal problem? It's the universal. In other words, the natures of things. Can we know what things are? If we do know them, then we'll know how to treat them. If we don't know them, we won't know how to treat them. How ought a man behave? Like the young woman who said to her mother, was criticizing her from the University of Sydney. This was a pharmacist's family, I know, in Sydney. And the daughter said, was behaving utterly stupid with some of her classmates from the University of Sydney, which is par for the course, by the way. And her mother later said, how immature those people are. And then the daughter says, oh, mother, who knows what maturity is? I said, maturity is the acquisition of the 6 intellectual virtues and the 4 cardinal or moral virtues. That's what maturity is. To acquire them. And 2 things in education go to make up the educated person. Prudence and wisdom. Prudence in the practical order, to make good judgment in the practical order. Wisdom in the speculative order. The ultimate knowledge of what ultimate causes are. So that's what this universal is about. Who knows what a man is? Who knows what maturity is? Who knows what an animal is? You can see the stupidity, particularly with many people. What's his name, the famous philosopher again over east here? Gould, isn't it? The Stephen J. Gould. Couldn't think of his name for a minute. But he's a biologist. But what I'm saying is, you can see the silly things they say, these people, because they don't have any understanding of natures of things. The gulf between man and a brute animal is not just one little digit, as Professor Little in biology, in biochemistry in the University of Sydney once claimed. Oh, there's only just one little jot, one digit difference between a man and a brute animal. The gulf, my friends, is infinite. Non-intellectual, non-rational beings compared with rational beings. The gulf is infinite. And the infinite is this: no matter how many you take or how much you try to cross, there's more to come. You never cross it. Nothing less than God can raise a brute animal to a man. I don't see any reason why he would want to do that. However, the natures of things, particularly in the moral order, that is of tremendous importance. You remember we explained the universal from the theory of knowledge. Then we explained the theory of knowledge from potency and act. Anaxagoras, 24, maybe 25 centuries ago, said the human intellect is purely in potency. He didn't use those terms. It took Aristotle to do that. Purely in potency. Because it can receive all things. Therefore, there's none of those things in it, in the intellect. Aristotle expressed his teaching this way: what appears inwardly hinders and obstructs the extraneous. If there was a bodily nature in the intellect, or some determinate nature, then it could know other natures. And St. Thomas raised that to the proof of the spirituality and therefore immortality of the human intellect. But it's set forth in the best possible way. I could find nothing to equal it. by Austin Woodbury, a boy from the bush, a boy from the farm. Father Woodbury was a genius. I heard Radford, who we considered a genius, call Woodbury a genius. He was a great man. So, one student asked me for all of his works. Another student offered to copy them for her. It's never been done, and I don't think it will be done. But it's a job that didn't realise what they were asking for. I've got his unpublished works in about 40 volumes. Dr. Bonnet would be the only person I know who would be familiar with them, of course. Anyway, the theory of knowledge, magnificently done. And you understand the nature of the universe. Look, if I said to you about a bridge is a wonderful thing, now what am I talking about? A bridge whereby you cross a river? A bridge in the mouth? A bridge in knowledge? See how the universal nature can apply to various particulars? But so many philosophers have tackled this in a stupid way. I call it stupid because people like the English empiricists, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, they didn't bother to go out of their way to find out things. They started all off in their arrogant manner to reform philosophy itself. The most arrogant one of the lot was René Descartes. He sent them all off in the wrong direction. And everybody spoke and wrote as if Descartes was the first man to do this sort of thing. So I've set it out there, this universal or common nature. Oh, it's the wrong time to discover misspellings. Nominalist. Oh dear. Nominalists. So it's, some say, the nominalists say we can't get it. And if you take English philosophy, Father Martinelli, Montreal, one day said to me, he said, all philosophy today is founded upon the metaphysics of David Hume. David Hume didn't have any metaphysics. That's what he meant, of course. But he didn't have any metaphysics. He was the first to deny it in a way, not one of the worst, I mean. But the nominalist says we cannot get this universal nature. Then Kant says that we form a compositive union with the things outside. They're compounded with our intellect, and how much comes from that, how much comes from the intellect, we don't really know. But the idealists, another misspelling, say that we produce the idea. There's a distinction between an idea and a concept. The concept means we have something coming into the mind. We conceive. That's what the word means. Just as a woman's womb conceives, so the mind conceives. And it's fertilized by the tree out there. Things fertilize the mind. We have, let's see, oh, he's got a very fertile mind. Oh, he can think of this and think of that. So, but the idealists say we produce the whole thing. We don't receive from out there. We produce it. And it received its ultimate stage in Hegel. Kant says it forms a compositive union, the mind does, with what's out there. As I said, we don't know how much comes from the tree and how much comes from the mind. The idealists said, Kant says all we can know is the existence of things. And the idealists say, but existence is another idea. So what do you mean it exists out there? How do you know? Plato thought the ideas existed in another world. William of Champeau, it's all the apparent singulars have the universal really there. But see, the treeness as singular is there, but as universals in here. As St. Thomas says in his beautiful commentary on the De Trinitate Boetius, something is imposed on the mind by the external reality, and something is imposed on that by the mind. The mind gives it the universality. That's what the mind does to it, whatever goes into it. So it goes on. The ontologists go to an absurd length. The ideas are seen existing in the divine intellect. Some say God acting on our intellect do something. Descartes and Augustine said something similar. It illuminates the mind. but it can be got by abstraction. That term abstraction. Ab in Latin means from. A or ab mean from. Plus tractare. What's a tractor? Something that pulls. So abstract means we pull the universal away from the thing. So I can recognize something that is that elephant out there, a flea here, or one of these. Look out, that's another one. We can recognize all of those things as an animal. Now, one of my great loves is invertebrate zoology. Tremendous number of species. Vertebrates, giraffes and things like that, yeah, they're all interesting. But invertebrates, billions of species apparently. They're finding new species all the time. I was in the Australian bush on one occasion, the Muagamara Sanctuary. We have wildflower sanctuaries in Australia. It's now closed to the public. People are making too many little damages here and there, and it's only open to students, scholars, or botanists or something. And a fellow said to me, just take a look at that bushland. He said, we know about not even half of what's there. I could name about 100 species of wildflowers in Australia. It has more wildflowers than any other continent, by the way. And he says, we really don't know much about what's out there, in spite of all the studies that are done. But that universal animal can apply to man, can apply to a flea, can apply to a snake. But some men have said the universal is just a common image. Well, common image. Being, for instance. What's a being? Whatever is. Can apply to anything. Any one of the 10 modes of being. But try and have a common image of a needle, the Empire State Building, a flea, a snake, an elephant, your liver, etc., etc. Common image. There are about 20 differences between the concept and a common image. About 20 differences. We deal with that in philosophical psychology. Dr. Bonnet and I use 16 of those. Bill Carlo has another group. So, but Averroes and Avicenna, the great Arabs, they saw the need for abstraction. The Arabs had a great past, my friends. You know, there's a university somewhere in, is it in Egypt or Arabia? I'm not sure where it is now. I saw a wonderful documentary on it one night. And apparently they had a great university going, and that university had very advanced studies. See, there was a problem in the Middle Ages. Europe did not have the writings of Aristotle properly. They only had some of the logic works. Then it was discovered that they did have, or the Arabs had them. It came through Persia. Avicenna his real name is Ibn Sinha, but Avicenna is a Latinized name for him. And the Arabs had apparently got the works of Aristotle from somewhere. See, there was a great fire, within 100 BC, there was a great fire in Alexandria, which is the biggest library in the world. Had all the ancient works in it, and they're all destroyed. But the Arabs got hold of these somehow. And Avicenna made a mistake. Mistranslation from Greek to Arabic. Averroes went even further and made a greater mistake, so that man loses all responsibility. So, well, I may as well mention that, I suppose, if I've gone that far. So we explain it, by the way, the universal explained by the theory of knowledge. The theory of knowledge depends upon potency and act. Our eyes, for instance, our sight, if we look at something, it's because we have no colour in the eye that we can register all colours. We have no sound and hearing of its very nature, so we can hear all sounds within a certain range, limited by the limits of the organic structure, etc. But this is the way knowledge goes. We have two intellective powers, as Aristotle shows beautifully. We have what's called the agent intellect. It operates on the image in the imagination. operates on that, and produces the concept in the possible intellect, also called the passive intellect. Our souls have those two powers. The power of actively producing and the power of passively reducing. So, how did he express it? The great Cajetan, who commented on St. Thomas's works, "Conoscere est se habere passive activeque." To know is to have self actively and passively. So we're doing something. So one is active and the other is passive. This is the possible intellect, and this is the active intellect. Now the Arabs, Avicenna said, this is too big a job for us to produce out of this this ordinary image of a tree I've got, to produce the nature of tree. Or I've got an image of Bill, how do I produce the idea of man? He said, that's too big a job. So there's a great spiritual being out there somewhere that does this for us. It made a lot of sense, but it was wrong. You see, Aristotle, in the time of the Greeks, they did not have a word for spirit. So they needed a word for that. So spear, that describes the spiritual, and it's described, the spiritual is described that way because it means to breathe. So inspirare in Latin is to breathe, and it's got that idea that the intellect is something like breath. You can't get a grip on it. That's what the idea was. So he said, but then that's Avicenna. But then Averroes went further. He says, we don't have this either. It's too big a job for us. I mean, it's containing these things which have infinite application. For instance, the term man can apply to people in New Guinea. You know, in recent years they're discovering people that existed about that high in some part of New Guinea or the Indonesian peninsulas. The Indonesian, no, what's it called? All these islands, anyway. They've found these little men, skeletons, and the people knew of them. They must have existed in recent years sometime. Well, all right, the term man applies to anyone and everyone, whether he's black, white, brown, brindled, yellow, no matter what colour he is, or how tall or short, or how fat or slim. What am I talking about? Etc., etc. So all these things, that term applies to them. But these men, who are the best, it has been said, are the best psychologists in the history of the world on the internal senses. We have 4 internal senses. And the Asian intellect operating on these can produce the concept. So there's the Arabs. It was St. Thomas Aquinas had a friend named William of Moerbeke, Moerbeke. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. I don't even know what language it is. So William of Moerbeke, at St. Thomas's request, he was a great linguist and particularly competent in Greek. He asked him to retranslate the works because all the works coming in from the Arabic world all had this same common mistake, and this is what it is. Aristotle, since they didn't have a word for spiritual, said these things are separable. A part of us is separable. What he meant is separable from matter, but they interpreted it as separated. That's the mistake they made, translating from the Greek into Arabic. So they said, oh, it's in some big angelic being somewhere that produces the ideas in our mind. So they confused separated with separable. What he meant by separable in the Arabic world was separate from matter. It's different from matter. That's all he was saying. So when we talk about things, we say immaterial, not matter. What is the spiritual? It's immaterial, not matter. We've got no way of describing it. Because all our ideas come from concrete reality around us. So the possible intellect, where does this leave us? We're little more than dogs. The devil made me do it. That's what we could say. I'm not responsible for anything. So that's the It was destroying Western culture. And it was being taught vigorously by the followers of Averroes in the 10th century in the University of Paris, which was the great university at the centre of the world then. And it got so violent that even the clergy had to carry swords and clubs to defend themselves. It became so violent. So, because they just hated the other people who were denying their philosophy. Do I make it clear that spirituality, it's too big a job for us, all our ideas? That was the Arabic world. So there's one sole intellect for all men, being beneficiary of it. That's Averroes. But each man having an intellect beneficiary of it is Avicenna. Looks like I've left something out there. Look at that again. Averroes said we don't have either intellect. Avicenna says we have the receiving intellect. That's why we've got the ideas. Now, one of the things I want to do tonight, actually I've got something special. We're going to do that after we have the break. The formal object and the subject of a science. This is something that's sadly lacking. As the Vice President of the Catholic Academy of Sciences, or I'm sorry, as a member of the Catholic Academy of Sciences, I see this happening with the scientists. That they have no understanding about how to distinguish one science from another. The secretary, Dr. Grady, said after I presented a paper on the distinction of sciences, he said a lot of people wouldn't call those sciences philosophy and sacred theology. But I'll go this far, and I'll prove it. They're more scientific than, say, chemistry or physics. Why? Because they're the most certain sciences. We can arrive at certain conclusions, which we can prove. But all that the empirical sciences do, they just go to proximate causes. This caused that caused that. But ultimate causes, that's the function of the philosophy. So since causes are the criterion for a science, study, knowledge of causes, so therefore philosophical sciences and sacred theology are even more certain. Or even sacred theology, for instance. With a science, always authority is the poorest form of argumentation. Yet philosophy is accused of that, particularly traditional philosophies are accused of being all the time, the master said it, therefore it's true. No. St. Thomas says somewhere that's the poorest form of argumentation. But it can be with sacred theology the highest form, because the authority comes from God himself. That's a different matter. So let's take a look at this now. On page 132. What exactly? How do we distinguish sciences? This is the way it goes. We have, first of all, every science studies something in bodies. It always starts from bodies. But then there's a method. We have what's called the light of the science, which is the method. The principles, etc., illuminate that object. So we have this. There's the light. Let's say, for instance, sight. Colour. We illuminate colour with light. For instance, if we turn the lights out here, we'd see nothing. But the colour is illuminated by light. And then from that, we can see what it is, a tree, a dog, or something else, to see all its properties. So each science has a method. Its method. For instance, in all empirical science, observation. We examine the subject of the science to find all its properties, which is the object of the science. Colour is the subject of sight, and movement, stillness, size, shape, all those things we see as a result of colour. If there wasn't colour there, we wouldn't see it. So I've illustrated that there on page 132 for you.
33.
No, 33 is the next one. It's the one I'm on now.
Minus 133 also.
Oh, look at that. Material object gone on over the page. Oh, dear, that's bad. So we call this what the sight gets at, colour, we call that the formal object. The form in the object, if you like. That's called the formal object. That's the subject or formal object. Now this is the object of the science. This is the formal object we're under. Formal object we're under. Or whereby, if you could even say that if you wanted to. So, if you look over the page, and we see how it applies to a science, and I've taken something that's so obvious. Philip Frank, in a book, What is Science, says that he thinks that geometry is the perfect science. Well, he's no philosopher. He belonged to the Vienna Circle. There were a bunch of engineers, mathematicians and physicists who got together and decided to start philosophy all over. It lasted for about 15, 20 years and then went out of date already. They just said that everything has to be reduced to sensation. Yes, but not limited to sensation, which is what they assumed that meant. For instance, if you ask a question, for instance, does God exist? It's a meaningless question because what can you reduce it to? Observation. They said you can't observe anything. Since it cannot be reduced to a sensation, therefore it's a meaningless question. That's their argument. Well, when I was a student in Montreal, we all had to do special study of that, Philip Frank's book. But logic, truth and language. But it's gone out of date long ago. Today all they do is analyze sentences. No principles, nothing, just analyze, the analytic method. So here's the formal object, or we could call it in modern terms the relevant object. Now the material object is whatever the form is in. So you see the two arrows, they should be the key. There's the manifesting object. Geometric abstractness. In other words, what does my mind do? It sees squares, this is in geometry, remember? Sees squares and triangles and things like that. And my mind draws them out. That's what happens. My mind draws them out. So there's the manifesting or the light from the principles of geometry. And you know the principles of geometry, what is it? This sort of thing. Take a point outside, the shortest distance is a straight line. Put another point outside, you can only draw one line that's parallel to this, etc. Whereas in Riemann and Lobachevsky's geometry, they say this is not a short line. This you can draw many parallels, etc. But we're not interested in that. Geometry of the unreal. So all light is from the principles. Immediately, for instance, geometric triangle. Then immediately, because the mind has discovered geometric triangle, therefore we can study all the properties now. 3 angles of a triangle equal 2 right angles, etc., etc. So that gives you an idea how sciences are distinguished. The ultimate manifesting principle is what do you do in the science? What you pull triangles out of wood, out of chalk on the board, etc. The mind grasps all these shapes. That's what geometry does. Once we've got them out of all the things, then we can see the mere triangularity itself. Now this sounds a bit obvious probably, but when it comes to a science it's not quite so. Another science not always the best clear as that. Now in chemistry, what do? We observe colour changes, precipitation, that sort of thing. But always it comes down to an observation. When I was studying organic chemistry, we had one of the first things in the lab they started to teach us was how to determine the temperature of melting point. And what do in the last analysis? Observe it. Professor Fawcett used to say to us when a student had come to him and say, Professor, is chromium chloride, for instance, is it soluble? Go and try it, he said. Go and try it. He always said that. And anyway, So all those sciences, the light of empirical sciences is always observation. A relative of mine said recently, the only way to learn to think is by studying mathematics. My question was, prove that mathematically. I didn't get a reply, and I don't think I ever will. The same with this. I remember Father Woodbury challenged a man to a debate in Sydney one time. I was away at that time. I didn't hear the debate there. The debate was on something, I've forgotten now what that debate was. He delivered a paper, that was it. And somebody said, the only sciences are the empirical sciences. All right, prove it using the empirical method. You cannot prove by observation that observation is the only method. It's a contradictory thing. They don't realize how immature they are in some of these things. So, note what I've got there. Geometric, in other words, triangle. The idea of triangle, that's what it immediately means there. The idea of a triangle. It's the subject of a science, it's the medium of demonstration in logic, and it's the middle term of a reasoning in logic. Whereas, once you've got a triangle or a square in your mind, then you can start and open out all its properties. But the principle is the principles of that science. Abstraction. You abstract the triangularity from wood or from this on the board. Abstract that. And once you've done that, then in the mind, all the properties can flow out. You can prove all the properties then. Distinguishing the image from the concept, I've said to students, would somebody like to put their idea of a triangle on the board? Yes, always got some young lady. Oh yes, I'll do it, Professor. And runs up the board, puts a triangle. I said, that's not triangle, it's this triangle. That's the image of a triangle. Triangularity, there's only one way you can express it, is through the definition. And it applies to any triangle then. So I've asked them, so I say, is that an isosceles, or what kind of triangle is that? Is that the same as one like this? No. Well, that's what I ask you for, the nature of triangle. A plane figure bounded by three straight lines. So, here's a bird's eye view of formal objects on page 133, down the bottom there. Illumination of the object, revealed by definitions, principles, etc. Then you get geometric triangle is the subject of the science, and the three angles equal two right angles, etc., etc. That's the object of the science. So it's the method revealed by definitions. That's what's important in a science. As I just made a few remarks just now about that, that you cannot prove using observation that observation is the only method. Like on one occasion talking to an atheist, there's no God. Prove that. Oh, I can't, but you can't prove there is a God. Oh, I didn't think you'd give me an invitation, thank you. So sit down now and shut up and listen. So, the light of the science always. It's the method that's important. In philosophy, we prove our principles are principles of reason. In empirical sciences, all the principles are principles of observation. That's the principle. The method is very important. That's how we distinguish the sciences. We'll compare it here on page 134 at the top there. Light, for instance, a flashlight, illuminates the red surface of an apple. That reveals then the shape, size, movement, location, etc. of the apple, becomes intelligible then. Man is the subject about which the science reasons, and the effect of all that reasoning is to reveal what can be known by the science. So, I think in chemistry, for instance, we observe changes. When we're testing the boiling point of various chemicals, how do we finally determine the boiling point? By observing the change in a thermometer. seeing the thermometer go to a certain point. We'd observe first of all, that the substance changes from a solid substance to a liquid substance, and we've defined the melting point. Then we'd see the change, immediately look at the thermometer to see the change. So, the formal character of the object. Note that the formal character of the object in science is twofold. The one of the object as thing, the other of the object as object. Or the other as which, the other as whereunder. Whereunder means the light. Whereunder, under which light? Whereunder. Read that through. It's good if you can understand that. So we can find 3 degrees of science. Metaphysics, mathematics, then natural science. And natural science is divided into 2. It's empirical science and philosophical science, philosophical nature. So I'll just read that through. I think you can grasp the general idea. Then here's a passage from St. Thomas taken from the famous proof or book by Boetius. What Boetius did, he wanted to know about how can we know about the Trinity. So he wrote this book on the Trinity, and St. Thomas wrote a commentary on it. And it's absolutely magnificent with modern science. I was speaking to some professors from a university in Australia on one occasion when I was thinking of applying for a position there. That's a long time ago. They said, what could the medieval period do for us today with science? I said, a lot, if you really know what went on there. And this, for instance, in this commentary on the De Trinitate, on the Trinity, but Boetius, St. Thomas's commentary on it, he shows the distinction of sciences and how we distinguish them into practical science and speculative science. So read that through for yourselves. So the division of sciences, then on page 136. There's instrumental philosophy, or the instrument of philosophy. In fact, the instrument of every science, logic. Its strict definition is the science of second intention. The first intention is this. My mind grasps this nature here, man, belong to the species man. You're a man now, did you know that? So this species, the mind grasps that. That's the first intention. Then the mind sees that as identified in that there, that this is concretized here. That's the second intention. Relation between the concept and the singular, or between concepts. That's the second intention. So logic is called the science of second intention. We needn't worry about that. All we need to know is it's a science about reasoning. And the science is really about the judgment. That's what's important. Reasoning gets new judgments. But in order to understand the judgment, you've got to understand that we form concepts first, and then put them together in the mind, in the judgment. Now, principal philosophy, there's speculative and practical. The philosophy of nature, and I've got it all set out there for you. And the philosophical psychology, cosmology, philosophical psychology. Then metaphysics, as we've seen. Then there's practical science, ethics and poietics. Poietics means the making function. In other words, the philosophy of art, the philosophy of mechanics, the philosophy of, what's the word I'm looking for? Aesthetics, the word I'm looking for. Then mathematics, discrete, such as algebra, arithmetic, and continuous, geometry. Sacred theology, all light of the science is from revelation. Empirical sciences. Well, in order to make empirical sciences more intelligible, because observations don't go as intelligible as it ought to, they've introduced mathematics. Now, mathematical science is properly mathematical, but materially physical. So these middle sciences, they're called, scientia media, in modern natural science, is a welding of experiment and excuse me, and mathematics. Remember, empirical only means observational. Well, all an experiment is just controlled observations. So it's not intellectual enough. So they introduced mathematics to give it more rational basis. Now, I've introduced here now some articles of St. Thomas. I thought that would be good to practically finish up our course. We'll work through these, and they're very beautiful to work through, very simple. Then we'll get on. I was going to avoid analogy. I don't know why, but I'm going to do it. I've got it already written up for you. I want to add something to it. I haven't given it to you yet. It's a beautiful study, but something I'm going to do tonight after the break will introduce us to that too. Analogy of being. This, for instance, I once sat on a headland. I must have been about 17 at the time, and I was looking down at the sea smashing on the rocks. We were on holidays at Bulladila. These are all Aboriginal names that we have. And Bulladila, I was looking down at the rocks and watching the rocks smash on the waves smash on the rocks. And I wrote this about the cruel sea, the anger of the sea is grinding its teeth and frothing at the mouth. That's just how it seemed to me at the time. And I wrote this poem about that. Well, that's all analogy. The lion is the king of animals. How do we relate all this? We'll deal with that. I think you'll enjoy it, as a matter of fact. But first we have to deal with this. Some questions concerning the relativity of sciences. Now this is the first question, the very first question in the Summa of St. Thomas, the Summa of Theology. The first 26 questions concerning God, his existence and nature. The first question asks, is there any science necessary? Do we need another science? Do we need two sciences, in effect? That's what he's asking. Sacred theology and natural theology. Natural theology, we're looking up at the world from a worm's eye view. Sacred theology, we're looking down at the world from a bird's eye view, from God's view, as it were. So, do we need two sciences? That's what he's dealing with. And it's extremely interesting, in my mind, to show how something could be a science. I wish Dr. Grady at the Academy would read this sometime. So there he asks these 10 questions. I think I left a couple out, or one out. I don't think... I've left the figure out. That's what I've done. Yes, number 9. I think I left it out. Just the figure out there, but the thing itself is not in, I don't think. Now, whether besides the philosophical sciences any further doctrine is required. By the way, if you go to the Summa and read these questions, these articles, you'll find them set out quite differently from the way I've got them here. I took quite a bit of work, but I separated the different passages, the different sections of the passage in a new paragraph, which they didn't in a lot of the other stuff. And I've underlined what I think are critical parts of the statements there that makes the mind can focus on it better. It is said that the best way to read them, these articles, is to read the objections first. St. Thomas always puts objections. I think in one of his works in the Treatise on Truth, he's got 27 objections to his own teaching. Then he gives the answers to them all. He shows how they're not real objections. They only appear to be so. The best way, it is said, is to read first the objections, then what's called a sed contra, on the contrary, and then the respondeo. I answer that. Then read the answers to the objections. Excuse me. Sometimes it's not even necessary for him to reply, just rarely. He doesn't need to reply. Because once you've read the body of the thing, you can see it clearly, how it's answered, the objection's answered. So his first article, remember there are questions, and they're divided into articles. There are 10 articles in this first question. We'll start with the on the contrary. It is written, all scripture inspired of God is profitable to teach, to reprove, to correct, to instruct in justice, Now, Scripture, inspired of God, is not a part of the philosophical sciences discovered by human reason. Therefore, it is useful that besides the philosophical sciences, there should be another science that is inspired by God. These are St. Thomas's words. I thought it'd be very good for you to be introduced to this kind of thing, and be a lot to get out of it. I answer that. It was necessary for man's salvation that there should be a knowledge revealed by God, besides the philosophical sciences investigated by human reason. First, because man is directed to God as to an end that surpasses the grasp of his reason. The eye hath not seen, O God. Besides thee, what things thou hast prepared for them that wait for thee. But the end must first be known by men, who are to direct their thoughts and actions to the end. Hence it was necessary for the salvation of man that certain truths which exceed human reason should be made known to him by divine revelation. Even as regards those truths about God which human reason can investigate, it was necessary that man be taught by a divine revelation. Now the great problem today, as I've pointed out before, and it makes me mad when I see it in evidence. Fideism. All our knowledge is reduced to faith today. Somewhere not far from here, you can study the Bible. You can read these and have good foundation for studying the Bible. It was said, for instance, that Scott Hahn, who converted from Protestantism to Catholicism, really is starting to convert Catholicism to Protestantism. You see that too?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that obvious? Why? Because he's sinking this into this, that the Bible is the only source of truth. Fideism. I had arguments with people. It's no small news that we conducted the International Mother's Day Walk for Life. By the way, it's starting up again. I had a call from the priest in Toronto. We started that. A girl and I at Niagara University, and Dr. Bonnet quickly came in and stood with us. And we had that going for years. And 22 years or something. And I remember having a flat argument one day. When we had the movie cameras on us, all the television stations had some representative there from Canada and the US in the middle of the Rainbow Bridge. Women would go like this with rosary beads. They'd get right in front of the cameras. I'd say, put that away. Why? This is not a religious meeting. This is a natural law meeting. This is a civil meeting. And, you know, we're making a civil protest about the abortion industry. And by the way, Planned Parenthood was smarting under that. They let that out a couple of times. But anyway, the question is that they were saying, I said, it's not a religious issue. I beg to differ, said a woman. Then another elderly lady in the walking procession said, I said, madam, this is not a religious matter. Yes, it is. She'd know, after all. You know, she's got a pair of rosary beads in her hand, therefore she'd know. So, too much of that. This fideism. 2 and 2 equal 4. That's not a matter of faith. That's a matter of the human intellect operating mathematically. So that's what St. Thomas, in reading the Bible, that's what they do. If they're reading the Bible only, I'm not decrying reading of the Bible, but you've got to have a formation, an intellectual formation in order to read these things. For that reason, the Church ordered her clergy, and I believe it was my old friends, the Passionist Fathers, who brought it in that it was mandatory for the clergy to study philosophy first. In the Middle Ages, it was just taken for granted. Everybody studied philosophy first, then studied the sacred science. And the mind was the better for it. And I attended sessions that were held in Niagara Falls over a year or so. And I heard people say things that were utterly in conflict with Catholic teaching and with natural law teaching, because they had no philosophical formation and they're trying to understand the Bible. It is good to read the Bible. In fact, probably one of the top things you can do, you're reading the Word of God. But you've got to have a mind that doesn't go into false conclusions because of your reading. So we go on. Remember, some things surpass the grasp of reason. Then the next paragraph. For the truth about God, such as reason can know it, would only be known by a few, and that after a long time and with the admixture of many errors. Whereas there are the three reasons he gives why it's necessary to have the Bible. Excuse me. Sacred theology is based upon the Bible, but through reasoning, through strict logical reasoning.
Aren't we presupposing that the Bible is true?
Oh, well, yes, but apologetics deals with that.
Right.
That's a part of sacred theology, the first part of sacred theology. We're presupposing the Bible is true, yes, but that's good if you're not a scholar. It's very good to do that, presuppose it's true.
But if you're arguing with somebody, you're trying to convince someone of this.
Then your philosophy comes to the fore. Then
Okay.
you see, you can
So
defend it.
You can't reason this way to an atheist.
No, you cannot. That's right.
So, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that made me mad when a certain woman in Canada, on one occasion, there was a woman who has a crisis of faith, she said. A Catholic woman had a great crisis of faith. And Mrs. M, and you know who I'm referring to, said, oh, read the encyclicals of the popes and you won't have that. I thought, then I find the woman got hold of some, excuse me, theological nut. And he started to indoctrinate her with all the nonsense, and I was pushed out of the picture. But you see, St. Thomas said, the uninformed Catholic that speaks out is a very dangerous person. So, my friend, that fideism, but don't misunderstand me. The Bible is the Word of God. One young woman said to me, excuse me, could I have some water? She said to me, but there are contradictions in it. Oh, I said, where? Well, one book says something, the other doesn't mention it. I said, that's not a contradiction. See, we held philosophy now. I pointed out what a contradiction was. Excuse me. So, but a person, it would take a long time for the ordinary folk, thank you very much, the ordinary folk to get in their minds the proofs for all these things. Not everybody is a scholar. And they have to have, with probably many errors, look at the errors amongst philosophers there now. One man thinks abortion's all right. One of my colleagues at Niagara University said, I think a woman has a right to have an abortion to save her life. Now, my friends, is that what you'd like to hear your sons and daughters learning in a so-called Catholic university? Etc., etc. Now, so remember what he says here. It would be known, the truth would be known only by a few, and that after a long time and with the admixture of many errors. Not everybody can be a philosopher. It's always the non-philosophers tell me that, by the way. Oh, not everybody can be a philosopher. Or some woman who's head of a Catholic women's organisation says, you talk over people's heads. Somebody said that wouldn't be hard. Somebody else said over.
Belief there.
Pardon?
Not much of a belief.
No, that's right, not much of a leap. But this particular woman, I'd say, thinks with a mouth, and of course that's the problem. See, only about 1 in 12 people actually think rationally. Most people think with their imaginations. That's not condescending, that's stating of a truth.
Lenin built his entire revolution on the principle that only 2% of the population are critical thinkers.
Did he? That's interesting, that. Yes, I don't doubt
That was
that.
before television.
So now it's down to 1%, isn't it? Now, most people think with their imagination, and you see, they would never find the truth. So there's nothing wrong with having faith. But fideism replacing reasoning, that's bad. Especially when the people speak out and pass their knowledge out as if it's truth. Therefore, in order that the salvation of men might be brought about more fitly and more surely, it was necessary that they be taught divine truths by divine revelation. Now, here's the man who's considered the prince of all philosophers, saying that not every man is a philosopher, but every man ought to have salvation So in order to be sure about it, God did a revelation. It was necessary there, besides the philosophical sciences investigated by reason, there should be a sacred science by way of revelation. So, when you're writing a book, you'd be surprised. I mean, this is the third book I've produced since you call it notes, call it what you like, but I'm receiving some strong urges by certain scholars to publish these things. But the amount of editing, changing a word here, making sure this fits right, eliminating errors there, it's a lot of work, believe me. So, and you're just getting it with the first editing, unfortunately. But I'm quite satisfied with it, just except little points here I'll correct. So now look at what he says at the beginning. It seems that beside the philosophical sciences we have no need of any further knowledge, for man should not seek to know what is above reason. Seek not the things that are too high for thee. But whatever is not above reason is sufficiently considered in the philosophical sciences. Therefore any other knowledge besides the philosophical sciences is superfluous. Now, you notice this is taken from the Bible. Seek not the things that are too high for thee. And you notice it says, it seems that, then he says but, then he says therefore. So it's put in a sort of a loose manner in a way. It's put into logical form. That's the syllogism. Statement of a principle, statement of a fact, therefore the conclusion. But it's beautifully laid out if you could see, if you had some logic and we could dissect each one of these things. What he's really doing is laying out the middle term. Here's the conclusion. Besides the philosophical sciences, a further doctrine is required. That's in the heading. That's the conclusion. Then all the rest of it is the middle term. So, he replies to those. Although those things which are beyond man's knowledge may not be sought for by man through his reason, nevertheless, what is revealed by God must be accepted through faith. Remember, St. Augustine received a slight rebuff by a child, the story goes. He was wandering along the seashore one day and he saw a child there digging a little hole. And the child is digging out, emptying this hole out of sand. And he said, "What are you doing?" "I'm going to put the ocean in this hole." So St. Augustine said, "You can't do that." He said, "I can do that just as well as you can understand the Trinity." Then the child disappeared. Whether the story is true or not, I don't know, but that's come down through history. That child is sent by God to teach him a damn lesson. St. Augustine started off his life as a bad lad. You all know that, I think. He had a wonderful female companion that he never married, and lived with her for 16 years. And then he suddenly saw, prompted by others, saw the error of his ways. He had a son, by the way. The son was called Adjudatus. Well, it's all one word, but I've separated it deliberately. Gift from God. I had a funny thing happen to me. When my little boy was born, he died 11 days later, by the way, which affected my wife, never got over that. And somebody said to me, "What are you going to call him?" "Well, we think probably Parmenides Heraclitus." I was visiting Australia some years ago, while I was living here. This may be about 10 years ago. And I met a fellow and he said, "Hello, Mr. Woods. This is at a lookout way down the coast from Sydney." "My name's Waters." He said, "Oh, that's right." He said, "You had a bakery shop in Dulwich Hill." I said, "Bakery shop? No." He said, "I was a pharmacist in Dulwich." "That's right, I used to work for you," he said, as a messenger boy. He said, he got on talking, he said, "I remember there was a fellow in Dulwich Hill, I can't remember who it was, and he said he had a baby and he gave it very strange names. Everybody was talking about it." Some idiot believed what I said as a joke and passed it well. Parmenides and Heraclitus. I said, that was me. He was a little embarrassed. He'd been a boy we employed for after school messages and things. So, what is revealed by God must be accepted through faith. But philosophy can do a critical analysis of it. Remember, there are over 50,000 critical books giving critical evaluation of the Bible. It's the most critically evaluated book in the history of the world. Now, reply objection 2. Sciences are diversified according to the diverse nature of their knowable objects. That's what we're dealing with tonight, remember? The objects. That's to say, the object which is known, for instance, the apple, the colour of the apple, and the object we're under. In other words, the light of the science. Think of light illuminating an apple. Once the apple's been illuminated, then we can deduce all its properties. It's round, etc., etc., etc. But if you haven't seen it on, then you won't be able to deduce any properties from it. So there it is. For the astronomer and the physicist both prove the same conclusion. Note this, that the Earth, for instance, is round. The astronomer by means of mathematics, but the physicist by means of matter itself. Hence, there is no reason why those things which are treated by the philosophical sciences, so far as they can be known by the light of natural reason, may not also be treated by another science, so far as they are known by the light of the divine revelation. Hence, the theology included in sacred doctrine differs in genus from that theology which is part of philosophy. And note, in sacred theology, a text is given, and then logic is used, philosophy is used to deduce indirect revelation. There's a formal or direct revelation, God says this, then an indirect revelation, or immediate direct revelation, if you like to call it that. There's another revelation which is implied, it's implicit in that, which is pulled out by philosophy. So the study of sacred theology really requires the study of philosophy first. But this proliferation of the study of the Bible, all of a sudden, we're in different places. Stop, Taylor. Thanks. Oh yes, we're overdue. Anyway, those various places, we'll take it up after. Anyway. Thank you.